Thomas Smale, the founder and CEO of FE International. Very good to meet you. I'm a longtime admirer of your work. Excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, thanks very much for inviting me on, Eric.
I don't know if you're going to be mad at me for doing this, but I've gotten a little bit of a self-education from reading a lot of prospectuses from FE International. Is this something that you frown upon or encourage?
No, I think if you're ever thinking about buying a business, I think it's good to research. The worst thing to do is buy the first business you see or look at 1,000 prospectuses and never do anything. So there's a balance between researching and going in completely blind.
It's kind of like it's a beautiful medium because it's like anti-propaganda. It's kind of like, reading an S1 as a value investor or something. You're kind of like, this is ideally very straightforward, very organized, very audited sort of information. And so I think it's a really good, reading prospectuses has been an educational hobby for me. I've learned a lot from it. And I think kind of each one kind of gets me closer to feeling comfortable about maybe buying a business in the future or even understanding how to build a business better for sale on my own.
Yeah, for sure.
So there's a concept that I think I heard from Naval, and I don't know if he was quoting somebody, but that a business is just a nexus of contracts. Do you agree with that as a notion?
No, I don't think I do. Obviously, a lot of what we do is contract work. So yes, contracts are at the very base of everything we do. But ultimately, I think managing people, I manage well over 100 people now. Contracts aren't really what drives people and what motivates people and what gets people to do what they should be doing or what they shouldn't be doing. There's a lot of gray area as well. Like a contract says one thing. So to an extent, at a very technical level, yes, I guess it is basically just a nexus of contracts. But in reality, contracts alone don't really build a business. You can have the best attorney in the world. That doesn't mean you have a good business. And you can have no attorney and very basic contracts or even agreements, and you can have a great business. So I think it's a bit of a balance, but ultimately contracts don't drive people. Most people sign contracts and don't even remember what they signed.
or understand it in the first place. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I read it. My read of that was a little more generalized, I think, not just contract, but, agreement or sort of process or organized exchange, maybe. I just thought it was a helpful kind of framework to be like, if someone asked you what is a business, like that's actually kind of a hard. I would struggle to give a confident definition off the tip of my tongue.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree. I think I would usually talk about saying that I don't know how I would define it. I didn't do very well at school, but probably something along the lines of something created which sells something that makes money. I think would be how I would define it.
Okay. It's interesting. I always love stories where people who are like, I didn't do well in school, and you would never, ever know based on the business that they built or the success that they've had in real life. So I'm excited to contrast that concept with the story that you're about to share.
For sure.
So tell us maybe a snapshot of like what FE International looks like right now.
Yeah, so super high level, we're an M&A firm, so mergers and acquisitions. We primarily represent SaaS, software, e-commerce, content-based online businesses. And we work on businesses anywhere from low seven-figure valuation up to $100 million valuation. Sometimes we work on larger, sometimes we work on smaller, but that's probably our current sweet spot. At the moment, our head office is in New York. So the majority of our team are there. We also have an office in London. We have an office in Miami. I'm in the Bay Area, so just outside San Francisco. And then some of our team are remote, I guess, as is the way with many companies at the moment. The team in total, well over 50 people now. All we do is M&A. So 100% of our business is representing sellers. That's how we get paid. We don't do anything else. We have some very minor other revenue streams, but that's the vast majority. I also do some investing myself, kind of on the side outside of FE. So we occasionally acquire businesses and things like that. But FE International, the M&A firm, is just M&A. Over the last 12 years, we've closed over 1,200 deals. It's well over $1 billion in total valuation in there. And a real mix. Clients all over the world, all sorts of different business models, different niches, different industries. You name it, we've probably seen it.
And I don't know much about the world of M&A firms. What is like the equation that drives that business? Maybe some of the economics involved at a high level.
Yeah, so all of what we do is we sell businesses, and then we get paid a commission when we sell the business. We almost never get paid retainers, so we don't get paid anything up front. So we're essentially investing in the process. We have a salaried team. We have a team in New York, a team in London, Miami. They're not cheap. They're not commission only. So we pay our team to work on the deal. We only get paid if it closes. I'd say in the industry that is quite common. It's definitely becoming more common as we go more up market to pay retainers. So not necessarily 100% getting paid on success. But I guess the way I look at it as a business owner is we do a really good job of what we sell, i.e. our service. So we don't necessarily need to get paid if we're not successful. The only time it ever really causes a challenge for us is if sellers get flaky. They get halfway through the process and they're like, oh, I've changed my mind, where usually we're out of pocket. But fundamentally, we sell almost every business we take on, assuming the seller hasn't changed their mind throughout the process. So the economics work quite well for us.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, probably halfway through that, I was stressed on your behalf. That's like an entirely fixed payroll, sort of variable revenue sounds scary. But I guess if you're 10 years into seeing 90% of your funnel convert, and you can kind of underwrite that pretty confidently.
To an extent, I mean, it definitely, as we've got bigger and people get paid more, particularly over the last few years, it definitely is a cash flow management challenge. But that's why we work on a real variety of deals. We don't just do $100 million deal every 6 months. We have $1 million deal closing today, $5 million deal closing in 2 weeks. So we consistently have deals closing at different sizes. Yes, $1 million deal does not barely even pays our office rent for a month. But at the very least, it's that consistent cash flow. So a lot of people have always wondered why we haven't stopped doing $1 million deals or $800,000 deals. And one of the main reasons is cash flow. We can sell those businesses quite quickly, relatively easily. They're good experience for the team as they're learning. So they have many benefits beyond just top line revenue.
And is there a sense that sort of customers return or recur, or you do a small transaction with them to get a larger transaction with them later? Is that a part of the dynamic, or do people just kind of tend to transact 1 or 2 businesses in their lives and go on?
Definitely at a senior level. So I guess on my desk and some of the senior people who report directly into me, repeat business is one of our most important metrics. Sometimes a lot of people are just one time. They just only ever buy one business. Maybe they get an SBA loan with a personal guarantee. They also borrow as much as they can. And that's all they do. Maybe they come back in 5 years, but that's it. I think sellers are quite likely to come back because most people are serial entrepreneurs. They don't just start one business, they'll start multiple. We've had, I think the record I remember in terms of percentage increase was 7 years ago. Someone sold a site with us for around $30,000, and then he sold a business last year for $12 million. So that was quite a big, and he had done a reasonable number of deals in the meantime, but that was his first deal above 7 figures, and then he'll see in that case broke 8 figures as well. So I've seen that many times. On the buyer side, we also have a lot of regular buyers. Buyers are less likely to be, I guess, loyal to one M&A firm. You'll find a lot of sellers who are like, this is my M&A firm, whether it's us or someone else, this is the only company I work with. Whereas the buyers, you should be kind of shopping everywhere and seeing what's out there. But there are a lot of buyers who either raise capital or buying is part of their business model. So they might do 1 deal a year, and they've done that every year for the last 5 years. Some people might buy 10 in a year, and then you never hear from them again. So there's a real mix.
So do you think of this mostly as a professional services firm? Looking at the website, I was kind of like, oh, this is a marketplace. And hearing you talk through it, it sounds a little bit more like a professional services firm.
Yeah, we're 100% professional services. Our website I guess, firstly, it's outdated and it doesn't really, it's not a marketplace. We cannot make any money without physically transacting with the people who come in. So the website is, I wouldn't quite call it just there because it needs to be there, but the vast majority of our communication is done by email and the phone, email outreach and things like that. So the website alone doesn't really show you what's happening behind the scenes. And there's not really any automation there. It's really just kind of like an ad, like here's the business request information, and then you're speaking to a real person. You're not going through an automation flow. You're speaking to a real person, probably in our New York or London office, and going through from there. So yeah, 100% professional services. I think one thing on our medium term kind of roadmap is to start automating some of the earlier stages of the process. But for now, 100% professional services. I don't see our revenue model changing. Maybe we can leverage technology slightly more efficiently, but that's a slightly separate challenge.
Yeah. And given that it's professional services, I imagine this was like a bootstrapped business. Did you have struggled to kind of manage cash flows or finance this thing as you've grown? I mean, to reach this scale in 10 years is meaningful. Like,
I definitely didn't have any money starting out, no, but essentially it was just me to start. And then in the very early days, when we were getting off the ground, we did a bunch of stuff starting out, because I was like, I need to make money doing anything. And then I can kind of pay my own rent was number one priority. Then maybe buying food was number two priority. And then it was everything else. In the early days, the team we hired were commission only because we couldn't afford to pay them a salary. And then over time that's changed. Now the team are primarily compensated with salary, and then they get an annual bonus as well. So they are incentivized by what they sell, but the vast majority of the team are primarily paid salary. So early days was definitely difficult. We've had to kind of change the business model over time with our team. And ultimately, as deals get bigger and more complex, there are very few people out there who can do those deals who want to work commission only. We're competing against JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, KPMG, PwC for talent, either in the accounting world or the investment banking world. We're not competing against kind of Main Street business broker or like realtor come business broker who have no real sophistication. They just know how to sell. Because to your point, when you read our prospectuses, they're not what I describe as like a bullshit sales document. We actually put real work into it. And we basically have the balance from my side is we have essentially a team of accountants preparing that document. So it's a balance between objectivity, and left to their own devices, they'd be 100% objective, and being also a sales document. We are trying to sell, but also trying to be objective. There's a very grey area between overselling something, misrepresenting it, which is obviously what we don't want to do, and being way too objective and not really doing our job, which is selling.
Yeah, I've read probably a few dozen prospectuses at least by now, and it does not surprise me to hear that they are written by accountants.
Yeah. I guess the nature of it is they have to be factual at the very fundamental level.
Yeah.
The one thing we never want to happen is someone to make an offer on a business, get into the due diligence process, and then 4 weeks in say, oh, your prospectus said X, but I've now discovered Y.
Yeah.
And that's just because we've kind of conflated the truth, or we've changed something that we were told to make it sound better. Ultimately, yes, that might slow down the amount of time it takes you to get an offer, but it means our success rate is extremely high when we do get one, because generally there are no issues with how we've represented the business. There's definitely a trade-off and like an ongoing challenge.
Yeah, and it's an interesting, I mean, the game theory of it is, for your business to succeed at the best over a long time horizon, you have to build this really strong trust and brand and reputation with both sides of the marketplace. And so you have to be really careful to like serve them both, I imagine, without ever putting a thumb on the scale, which has to be really tough.
Yeah, for sure. And particularly for us, like every year there's a new kind of flavor of the week competitor that pops up. And they're offering something that we know fundamentally cannot be offered. They're like, we'll sell your business for free, or we'll sell your business for double the market valuation or sell your business in 3 days, things like that, which we know fundamentally can't be done. Maybe they can be done in certain market conditions. So maybe it is that they can get buyers to pay them because buyers are particularly desperate for deals in that market and they don't need to charge sellers. Or maybe they can sell under market value and there are people willing to buy in 3 days. But you can't build a sustainable business doing that. So for me, again, it's a bit of a balance between staying the course and being disciplined, making sure that we're continuing to do what we do. But that means 12 years into the business, we have a steady flow of consistent clients, consistent referrals, and yes, competitors will come and go, but I'm always quite confident that in, say, 3 years' time, the fancy competitor everyone's talking about would have either gone away or it's not doing as much business.
Interesting. Yeah. What is your vision for maybe the long term of FE International? Do you kind of want to increase the density and like quality of your business? Are you trying to sort of continue to scale up? Where do you want to see it in, 10 years or 20 years?
So for us, it's primarily continuing to scale up. So continuing to do the deals at the level we're doing right now, but also continuing to move further and further up market. This is an approximation. It's not the exact, but approximately every year, the biggest deal we've closed around doubles from what we've ever done before. So if you go back, say, 5 years ago, the biggest deal we'd ever done was maybe like $5 million. Whereas today we're substantially bigger than that, and that only keeps increasing. So you can continue going up and up market. And the way we look at it is a lot of the deals we work on now, firstly, most of our team now have come from big investment banks or big accounting firms. So we don't lack the talent internally. Often when we're competing or working alongside another bank, we realize often like we're actually better than them. A lot of these big banks are really quite inefficient, particularly on what they would describe as a small deal. To say a $50 million deal, you get our best team. If you go to Goldman Sachs, you get like the interns. And our best team are significantly better than the Goldman Sachs interns. Yeah. And we'll take it much more seriously. In a deal like that, the MD or the director or whoever it might be at Goldman Sachs might look at the deal once a month for 30 minutes. Whereas you don't quite have my undivided attention, but I'm definitely involved, definitely looking at it, and we're good at what we do. So we're definitely encouraged as we've gone up market by the fact we can, at least service-wise, we can deliver as good or better than the big banks. Yeah. Does that mean we can always win business from them? No, that's a challenge because to your point, we've been around 10, 12 years, which is a long time in this industry, but the big investment banks have been around 100 years. So yeah, very difficult to catch up with.
Yeah. Nobody got fired for hiring Goldman Sachs.
Exactly.
So how did you come to start this business? Were you operating in the space independently before this?
So I was at college at the time, and I was buying and selling small websites and domains myself. So talking like $100, $50. I guess what you call it back then was like flipping. I'd sell it for $200, then I'd take my $200 on my credit card, buy something, sell it in a month for $1,000. So I guess I learned the transactional side of selling, and selling doesn't really change whether you're selling something for $10, $1,000, $100 million. The principles are essentially the same with slightly different sophistication. And then I learned the online space, and at the time there were not really M&A firms representing e-commerce, software, online businesses. If you had a restaurant or a gas station or something like that, there are lots of firms that could have represented you now and 10 years ago. But if you had an e-commerce business making 10 million a year or a SaaS business, yes, you could call those firms, but they wouldn't have a clue what they're doing. So then kind of fell into it by accident because I was buying and selling myself. I then wrote a book about what I was doing the year I graduated because I needed to make some money, basically. And then off the back of that, people were like, hey, Thomas, you're buying and selling yourself. Can you sell for me? And to my point about I didn't do well at school, I do technically have a business degree, but I don't think it really occurred to me that was M&A. I was like, yeah, I'll help you. Just pay me if it works, was essentially the premise. And then it did work. And then we've got loads of word of mouth in the early days. People laugh at our website now and say it sucks. We didn't even have a website for our first 2 years. We just had an email address. And he would email me and the team, and we would handle it like in private. A lot of what we do is like very confidential, has to be behind closed doors. We're not publicizing the name of a business we're representing. We're doing it all in private. So that's been kind of the core of our business from day one. And then it really snowballed behind the scenes. And then I guess the industry has exploded in size. More service providers, competitors, marketplaces have popped up. So there's a lot more knowledge in the space. Years ago, podcasts like yours, for example, wouldn't really exist, or you wouldn't really want to talk to me because you'd be like, oh, I've never heard of you guys. Like, who's even buying online businesses? Whereas today, it's a much more compelling kind of pitch for me because like there's lots of people in the industry. The average 21-year-old graduating college today does not dream of opening a restaurant. Well, maybe they do, but they're launching an app or an online business, or they're doing something in like crypto or whatever it might be. And that's, well, we don't do much in the crypto space, but that's really what we do. So we pick up a lot of people very early on who are, I guess, similar to yourself. Like, well, I'm window shopping, looking at businesses, seeing what I might want to buy. And obviously there's a balance for us. We don't let people look at 300 businesses and never make an offer. But if people just want to like learn while they're raising capital or whatever, that's fine, as long as you're not wasting everyone's time. Yes, that's kind of really where we are at the moment. It's kind of snowballed in the early days. And then today, the majority of our good business, at least, is still word of mouth, or a form of word of mouth anyway.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Because I was going to, like, there are so many, there's almost a business brokerage industry for each industry. You know, I was going to ask you about the business brokerage space, but that doesn't even really seem like the right way to slice it now that you've kind of laid that out.
We definitely got ourselves away from traditional business broker. I'd say business brokers, particularly in the US. But so I'm from the UK originally. I now live in the Bay Area. Business brokers in the US have a terrible reputation, and it's usually because they're not very good, and they generally come from a real estate background. So you know about the real estate. So traditionally, businesses, because they were bricks and mortar, real estate was a big part of the transaction. So you had to have a real estate license to sell a business. That's what business brokers were doing. So basically they knew how to sell the real estate. And then the business was like, oh yeah, this is a shop. It makes $1 million a year. And then the owner takes home 100,000, but check out the real estate. Whereas in our space, so, I mean, sometimes there are leases if it's an e-commerce business, but 95% of the time there's no real estate. So you have to be specialized. I don't know anything about real estate. I think I own a house. That's about the extent of my knowledge in the real estate space. So you wouldn't call me, and you definitely shouldn't call me if you want to sell a retail store, because I wouldn't really know where to start. But just the same as a traditional business broker, I wouldn't have a clue how to sell an e-commerce business.
Yeah, I mean, the way you fell into it is interesting, but you couldn't have picked better timing and a better niche, because I think the people who are interested in buying, you know, a digital business, so SaaS, e-commerce, content, are, I think, the ones that you are kind of highlight, are just so different, and the dynamics are so different. They're maybe much more scalably managed. You can buy them from anywhere on earth, if not the country. You can manage them from anywhere. You can manage multiple of them in parallel. It's a totally different skill set in many cases. You know, plenty of engineers buying these that certainly wouldn't be buying a car wash business or a laundromat or something like that. So you've golf claps for your timing and your in your context, and like the way you oriented yourself to the tailwinds of the market is amazing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it definitely also came out of the back. So I graduated into the last recession. Well, I don't know if it was technically the last recession, but graduated in 2010, coming out of the back of a recession. A lot of people were looking for other investment classes. So I think now you would consider like online businesses almost as a mainstream investment class that people know about. And everyone now knows about it. The biggest public stocks are now things like Netflix, or maybe not as of today, but the companies like Netflix, Dropbox, Microsoft, and like companies like Microsoft have transitioned to a SaaS model for most of their business. Like people now get what SaaS is because they're like, oh, I have to pay a subscription to Microsoft Word now. Whereas when I was a kid, you'd buy like the CD and it'd be like $100. And then when they upgraded it, you had to go buy another CD and all of that. But now it's all subscription, all cloud. Everyone now knows what SaaS is. So if you say, hey, we're selling a SaaS business, maybe they don't understand what the word SaaS is, but they will understand the concept of paying a monthly subscription to get access to a thing, whether that's software or otherwise.
I took a stab at the personas there in my last rant, but I don't want to put words in your mouth there. So how correct is that as a representative? Like, who are the buyers and who are the sellers? Who are like the people behind these businesses and these listings that you've got?
So say the buyers generally fall into, I would say they generally fall into three very broad categories.
Okay.
One would be like an individual investor. So someone who's either made a bunch of money themselves, maybe they have a job and they want a side business. Maybe they have a job and they want to buy a business and quit their job. Maybe they've already quit their job and they want to buy a business. Generally speaking, they will either have their own money or they'll take out a loan to buy a business. There's still relatively limited options to raise external financing to acquire online businesses, but there's definitely becoming more options. So individual investors, first group. Second group is some form of strategic buyer, and everyone thinks their business is going to sell to a strategic buyer, but the reality is strategic can mean many different things. Strategic can just mean they've raised money to buy a business like yours, so their strategy is buying businesses. Does that mean that what you would define, what most people would think is a strategic buyer? No, but is it part of their strategy? Yes. So I think strategic buyers is a very broad answer, but they're usually, so strategic buyers in this context would be someone or a company that already owns a business in an industry and they want to buy something complementary. And then the final group, and there's always overlap between these three groups as well. The final group is funds, investment funds, institutional buyers who have raised capital, which is not their own, to acquire businesses. So whether they have a fund and they just have US accredited investors, or maybe they have raised money they've raised debt to acquire businesses, whatever it might be. Lots and lots of different ways to do that. But that's generally the third group. And then on the flip side, sellers are a much wider range of people. Some of them are kind of stay-at-home mum who has never really worked before and they've launched a blog about cooking and it now makes $50,000 a month, and they sell it and they're exceptionally successful. One of our most successful clients, I remember, she lived in basically the middle of nowhere in the US. I don't think she'd ever got paid more than like $30,000 a year. She launched like one product from home. Long story short, built that business up in like 3 or 4 years, sold it for about 20 million. But if you met her, you would never know. She was exceptionally smart, but she's not like brash. She's not on social media. Since the sale closed a couple of years ago, you would have literally no clue that she did that. So you get a lot of people like that. And then you get the opposite. You also get kind of traditional, graduated with an MBA, have launched a really technical business from other people in their MBA class. And then lots of people in the middle, people who, like American Dream, want to own or run a business.
Bless you.
I did tell you I would sneeze at least once. Excuse me. So lots of people in between who want to launch a business, of American Dream, or maybe they're outside the US as well. We have clients all over the world. Maybe they've built up a service business around something they know about. Maybe they've launched a product in an industry they know. Maybe they've partnered up with a friend to build a business. Maybe it's kind of an ex-coworker or something like that. We have a very broad mix of sellers who come from all sorts of backgrounds. So like I said, that could be the stay-at-home mum who no one would ever believe could launch a successful business. But often they're the best business owners, because your first question about is it a nexus of contracts, they're like, well, no, I just produce content about the stuff I'm cooking at home, and then I share it on social media, and people like it. And because it's so genuine, people, with social media in general, people love to share like real things that feel genuine from a real person.
Yeah.
So often the best business people don't mean to be good business people because they're just producing something good. They're like, hey, here's this recipe. It's great. You should all know about it. I'm going to share it. And then later on, they figure out how to monetize it. Whereas the MBA is like, oh, okay, the first thing I need is a trademark for the name of my business. And then I'm going to patent the way we present a recipe on the page. And then I'm going to raise funding because we definitely need investors to do social media. Whereas the stay-at-home mum blogger has already written the content and they're already making money by the time the MBAs finish their PowerPoint deck. So lots of different ways you can do it. They're not necessarily right or wrong, but I've seen everything.
So how do you, as an investor, I mean, you're really in the catbird seat, which I know is a term, but I still don't really know why that is a truism. Anyway, I don't know, like, how do you look at that variety of businesses and decide, as an individual, what to invest in or what to buy as a company? Do you have a preference for one of those types?
Yes, I mean, the reason we buy them, we keep it very separate. So we try not to overlap, and we only really buy 1 or 2 businesses per year. Firstly, the reason I like doing that is so I kind of fully understand the process. I'm not just an advisor who doesn't do it myself. I think there's nothing worse than someone advising you how to do something if they've never done it themselves. So and secondly, I guess I'm fortunate as the business has grown. Financially, I've done better and better, but I don't know anything about anything other than what I do. So if I have $1 million, do I buy some real estate or do I buy a business that I kind of know about and understand? So that's always the way I've looked at it. And then primarily, I'm CEO. I'm very busy. I work all the time. I don't really stop, so I don't have time. So whenever we buy anything, and I buy with my business partner primarily, and sometimes we have investors involved. We look for something where we can bring in a manager or someone to run it. So our time involvement is as close to zero as is possible. And generally our only involvement is checking in with the manager once a week for one-on-one. That's usually the extent of my involvement. But I don't really do a huge amount of passive investing. I guess I'm still young enough and don't quite have enough resource where I still have to be hands-on and active. We're not buying it's not like buying a blue chip stock and just getting dividends. Like running a business, you do actually have to run it. So you have to be good at, if you want it to be hands-off as an investment, relatively, you still have to hire a good manager and you still have to manage a manager. You can't just hire a manager, leave them to it. I think there's a lot of, not necessarily called misrepresentation, but there's a lot of overly simplified views of what it's like to run a business on social media, where people are like, yeah, buy a business, no money out of pocket, hire a manager, it's completely passive. Like, that's not really how it works. Like, ultimately, if there's a problem with the business and you can't make payroll, you're the one that's paying that out of pocket. If there's a problem with the manager and the manager quits on Thanksgiving, you are the one who's working on Thanksgiving. There's no one else that's going to help you. So when it's good, it's really good. But when it's bad, it's really bad. I think a lot of people don't realize how bad it can get. So you kind of have to know what you're getting yourself in for. Hence why I like investing in the space, because I already know it and I do it day to day anyway. And I have a lot of contacts and resources already. Whereas if you said to me, hey, you just bought an apartment building and the yard needs fixing, who'd you call? I have no idea. I just go on Google like everyone else, and it's a guess.
So you said if you buy one a year, that made me wonder what the denominator is. So is FE International doing 20 a year or 500 a year? I don't even have a guess at the order of magnitude, really.
Generally over 100 per year. So generally do 2 deals a week. Can be higher than that, can be lower. I think in the region of maybe 150 last year. So yes, it's probably about 1% of our total deal volume is is me involved.
Okay. Yeah. And I think your point is well made on the, like, there's a lot of oversimplification. And there's very different types of businesses, right? There's like, the ones I tend to look at and snoop around at are like the very small, like, how can you buy, $5,000 or $10,000 a month in income? And those are usually people pitching like super low owner involvement. I answer tickets once a month for 1 hour, and that's it. And otherwise, I just collect the money. And then there's like, the next step up from that is, hey, it's a full time income, but it's full time work to manage this business and the risk involved. And then there's kind of what you were talking about, which is like, it is big enough to support its own manager, salaried, and someone to kind of shield the owner from the day-to-day work of the business, which is probably the ideal, but it certainly comes with, you got to be able to find all of the capital because that business is inherently got to be bigger. But time, the prospectuses that I read where it's like, the owner spends 5 hours a month on this business. I always have a hard time believing that. And it seems like one of the parts that's particularly difficult to represent honestly. Are those owners just being crazy optimistic? Are these businesses way more common than I can imagine? Like, how do you look at those? How do you audit that claim?
Yeah. So firstly, it probably is the most commonly misrepresented claim. To your point, it's very difficult to verify. That said, there are definitely business owners who do essentially nothing every month because they have a reliable manager. Because I think in any business, I choose to be hands-on with everything I personally invest in, but you can be hands-off. I think maybe this is just me being a micromanager, but if you're hands-on, I think you're generally going to have better success, but that doesn't mean you can be hands-off and the business will still do fine. I just think it does better with involvement. I think one thing that a lot of sellers do prior to selling is they significantly ramp their time down. They might have worked 80 hours a week for 10 years, and then the 6 months before selling, they're like, oh, I don't really want to do this anymore. Then they actually start working 5 hours a week.
Yeah.
They'll say, oh yeah, I work 5 hours a week on the business, which is technically true today, but was not necessarily true in the past. If I really wanted to, with FE, for example, I could hire a CEO to replace me, and I could check in once a week, or maybe never, or almost never, and still make a bunch of money. If I was then selling the business, I could say I do nothing. There's a management team in place. That's very possible. So it definitely happens. I won't go into our exact audit process of how we do it, because how we verify even, because what sellers like to, we ask, I guess the short answer is we ask questions in such a way that sellers give us the correct answer without realizing what we're actually asking them. Because if you say, how much time you spending on the business, and they say 5 hours a week, and you're like, oh, what are you doing? And they're like, oh, I just do social media. And they're like, how much time are you spending on social media? And they're like, oh, they're going to say 5 hours a week. So yeah. We'll ask them kind of like what they're doing, like how many lines of code did you write? And while we're not necessarily like, how long does a line of code take to write? 10 seconds or 10 days? Like that's very broad, but there are definitely signals you can look at to figure out how much time someone is spending. Like, do they have an internal Slack channel? Are they checking in with their team every day being like, hey guys, great day? In that case, yes, they're probably not working 30 minutes a day. So the things we do, I'd say it is difficult. We generally are on the side of caution, so we'll overestimate. And a lot of times sellers will get not frustrated with us, but they'll be like, oh, last week I spent 2 hours. I want to say 2 hours. And we'll say, no, look, the spirit of it is it's supposed to be the average amount of time you spend, not the lowest week you've ever spent in the history of the business. It's got to be kind of a fair balance. But I'd say privately, lots of people sell businesses, and we see this a lot where we say no to a business because we say, look, no one's going to buy this business because you've got two owners working full time. And you're barely even breaking even, paying yourself $50,000 between you. What people will then do, unfortunately for the industry, there are lots of marketplaces out there where you kind of sell yourself commission free, that kind of thing. And you can kind of say whatever you want. And if you really want to, it's relatively easy to misrepresent your financials, because you can have like a different company paying the expenses. So you could pay, for example, let's say you have a content business and you have an SEO agency and you say, oh no, all of the links are organic. You could quite easily have a separate entity paying a SEO firm $50K a month for that work. And it's very difficult to prove that work is happening. So at a very fundamental level, like a big part of what we do is just audit. Like it's boring and it's mostly accounting work. But we'll never list anything unless we're confident in the seller's claims around what they're doing and also their financials. And that's also, to your point, one of the advantages of having a good reputation. We're not a fly-by-night M&A firm. If you really want to go kind of misrepresent the business and screw people over, we're not really the kind of company you would call, because we're going to figure it out and we're going to say no. You go to the inexperienced broker who doesn't have any other deals and they're desperate to win anything and they'll take anything on. So that's one of the challenges with the industry. Like if you're trying to break in today, all these kind of new brokers doing it for free or whatever it might be, or lowest commissions, like it doesn't actually work fundamentally.
Yeah, that is a very interesting comparison, right? I mean, like that part of your value proposition is the auditing and the guarantee and like maybe some quality floor, because your reputation is at least somewhat intertwined with the quality and honesty of the listing from the buyer's point of view, right? So it's interesting to hear you talk through this, because as I read a prospectus, I'm always imagining the seller basically answering the same question that I'm reading. It's like, how many hours did you spend on the business on an average week? And then being like, how few hours can I get away with saying 2? And it's cool to hear like the actual process behind the creation of that you're trying to approach that as honestly as you can, even if the seller is, even if like a potentially adversarial like relationship with the seller, trying to sort of manipulate the process to merchandise their business the very best that they can.
Yeah, I think ultimately the way we approach it is like, hey, you've hired us for a reason. Like our advice is being truthful is the best approach. We will then position it in a good way. So everyone knows starting out a business, you probably worked 80 hours a week. There's almost no business owner who's starting out could not work those kind of hours. Like, and they're making, let's say they build an 8-figure business. I think you'd struggle to find anyone. Yes, can you build a business that makes $20,000 a month working 5 hours a week? Yes, but you're not going to get to 8 figures working 5 hours a week to start with. I'm not smart enough to do that. Maybe it's possible, but I don't know how.
Right. But that doesn't mean that they can't buy a business that is built that takes only that much time to maintain, right? Which is a huge distinction.
For sure, yes. But then I guess in that case, you're paying for the work that the seller has done in the first place to get there. And then the challenge is very different. There's a very big difference between launching a business and getting it off the ground and buying a business and managing it. Like when I started out, I was like that very traditional ADHD entrepreneur. I would have been a terrible manager, didn't have a clue what I was doing. So the thought of like now investing and then managing managers essentially would be the complete opposite of what you would think I'm good at. But now I'm actually quite good at that. And if you say to me, hey, Thomas, come up with an idea to launch a new business, what would you do? Like, what would you do if you sold FE International tomorrow? Honestly, I don't know if I would know. I think people like change over time. And I think you can mature over time. And I think for some people, buying a business is the only thing that makes sense. For some people, launching a business is the only thing that makes sense. I think there are very few people who can do both effectively. Maybe there are some examples, but I can't really think of that many that I've seen that are really good on a consistent basis of creating, but also managing, because they're fundamentally different kind of skills at scale anyway. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So to follow on with kind of what you're saying about the, how you construct these processes and how you turn away businesses that you don't feel are actually saleable or representing themselves well. I have a friend, my friend Andrew Finn, he was one of the first episodes on this podcast, and he is a buyer of small businesses. He calls them like, give me all the grimy ATMs I can find. They're on the smaller side of, in the business brokerage world. But he always says like he's wary of anything that's basically listed on a marketplace, because he views finding something in an obscure source that no one else will find as a source of alpha. And that he's like less sure that he's going to get a good business when something is listed on a place like FE International, where it's a little bit more like an open auction process, where there's maybe hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of people on your mailing list viewing every opportunity. It's interesting to see that as a trade-off maybe of some minimum guarantee of quality. But like, what's your response to that sort of line of thinking or that type of buyer?
Yeah, I mean, I think firstly, you can do it in lots of different ways. There are lots of different ways to create alpha. You don't necessarily, I think it's a bit of a oversimplification to think that the only way you make money on a deal is on the way in. Like, yes, that is probably the most common way if you can buy essentially a mispriced asset in a space which lacks transparency or whatever that might be. Fundamentally, like what we do, we've tried to educate. I mean, part of the reason I come on podcasts, for example, try and educate people as to what their businesses are worth and how to approach it. I say generally a lot of buyers, so the flip side of that is a lot of buyers with capital will only buy through M&A firms because firstly, it's a quicker process. You're dealing with, that 100%, or essentially 100% of the sellers we're representing are motivated to sell. Because we are representing them, that they have realistic expectations around valuation. We're very realistic with people. We don't say, hey, your business is worth $10 million if it's actually worth $5 million. It's just a waste of everybody's time. And like I said, we only make money if it sells, so we have no incentive to lie. You'll save significant time in due diligence because we've already done a lot of the audit work. So you're going to have way fewer deals that completely fall through. That said, if you're an expert buyer and you're good at negotiating and persuading people to sell their business to you, and you're happy dealing with a bunch of mess, which you're going to get buying businesses privately and small, that business model can work. But that's definitely not for the average person. If you have $1 million and you want to buy a business, you should almost definitely buy it where it's been professionally represented. I'd say that would be the kind of equivalent. Again, I don't know much about real estate, but that'd be the equivalent of in real estate, you have $1 million, you buy a duplex in Austin. That's probably quite a good investment in the current market. Or do you buy represented by Cushman & Wakefield or like a well-known real estate company? Or do you go and buy a foreclosure on Zillow for $1 million in wherever? It's probably a terrible idea if you don't know what you're doing. So exactly the same in this industry. And I think the other way I look at it philosophically, because I personally basically only invest in professionally represented businesses. So versus your friend, he would probably say I overpay in 100% of transactions or close to 100%, but there's a time value in there. And also getting a good deal or business is going to make you money. The entry price is not the only important thing in there. Arguably, the best businesses are represented by M&A firms, and the best businesses, if they have the ability to grow, or you've already identified something that can double that business within 6 months, which is very common, is that necessarily a bad deal versus shopping around for 6 months, paying 20% less than I just paid, but I closed my deal 6 months ago because I bought through an M&A firm. I've already deployed my capital. I'm moving on. Yes, maybe I had to pay a bit more because it was a competitive process, but I also own a fundamentally better business. So yeah, there's lots of different ways to look at it, but I'd say fundamentally a good deal is not necessarily paying the least amount of money up front.
Yeah, it's an interesting trade-off on, accepting a higher quality floor, maybe paying more for the asset, but paying less in due diligence or effort or uncertainty or the work that you have to do to professionalize the business that hasn't been professionalized already. It reminded me a little bit, as you were talking, of the the debate between Buffett and Munger. Like, a quality business at a fair price is better than a fair business at a quality price.
Exactly.
So,
I think that's my fundamental view, and I'd say that's definitely, to my point earlier, that's definitely changed. If you asked me 10 years ago, I would say no, absolutely. The only way to do it is get a good deal on the way in. But that's because I was primarily like on the buy side, and that's what I was doing. And my time was essentially worth nothing. Like, if I could pay my rent and feed myself that month, that was an achievement. So I have, a different philosophy now, and also depending on how much capital you're deploying. If you're deploying millions on behalf of yourselves or investors, I think the number one aim is capital preservation. So don't lose money.
Yep.
If you buy a business and it only grows 15% a year for 10 years, yes, maybe the guy who bought the business 30% below market value is going to do better. But there's also, if you run scenario analysis, the guy growing the business 15% year on year for 10 years is going to win in a significant number of those times. Mm-hmm. Yes, there will be the time where the other guy doubles the business every year for 10 years, but not they're also going to have scenarios where they go to zero. Yeah. So I think part of it is kind of my aversity to risk has changed as I've become more fortunate in my financial position.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting, it's an underrated piece of the puzzle. I think people sort of stand fast and draw their sword to defend their strategy, no matter where their point is in life, and forget to contextualize it in the sort of what their time is worth to them at the particular stage. Like, what is the alternative, the BATNA of their incremental hour? How much capital do they have to risk? Which is a huge consideration for, all of these strategies. So what is the, if I was sitting with two prospectuses on my desk, and one was from a, unaudited, shady, amateurish, let's just say, business broker versus an FE International prospectus, they might look the same to me if I was uninitiated and didn't know. So what is the work, sort of that differentiates an audited, guaranteed, sort of like well-processed prospectus from something that an amateur has whipped up to somebody who doesn't see behind the scenes?
Yeah, so firstly, assuming it's well done, firstly, there are no guarantees. So yes, we do the work, but you're not getting a stamp of guarantee from us saying you buy this business, we 100% guarantee all of this is accurate.
Fair. Sorry, poor choice of words on my part.
No, but it's an important distinction, because I'd be lying if I said we guarantee it. It's not what we can do. We go through and we verify. And the reason we want to do that is ultimately we want buyers and sellers to do well. If buyers buy a business and it's misrepresented and they don't notice and they lose their money, that's not good for us. That's not good for the industry. We haven't been around 12 years by selling businesses which stuck and are misrepresented. On the outside, if you just compared those two perspectives, you probably wouldn't actually notice the difference, because the majority of audit work is done behind the scenes. So if a cost line says they spend $10,000 on X and the other prospectus says $10,000 on X, probably the fundamental difference is we have verified that they've actually spent $10,000 on X, and the worst broker has almost definitely not done that. At best, they've taken the seller's word for it. And what we find in almost all cases when we do our financial audit, I would say in almost 100%, so not quite, but almost 100%, the financials we're given up front by sellers do not end up being the actual financials we end up with. And there's a trade-off between, were they misrepresenting intentionally? If they were, we drop them immediately. Accounting in business is complicated. Yeah. It's not always that simple. So sometimes, particularly in like e-commerce businesses, for example, like COGS, we're like, how much does it cost you to buy this? And they're like, I don't know, 10 cents. But then you actually look at it and it's like, okay, well, it actually cost them 11 cents for the last 6 months because, I don't know, shipping costs have gone up, or whatever it might be. So a big part of what we do is kind of getting the sellers to understand their own numbers. It's not just taking what they tell us and being like, cool, well, we asked them, we got them to sign off saying, I verify this is accurate. So the only way you're ever really going to know is when you get into due diligence and you start verifying the numbers. Or, I mean, the obvious way usually, and I'd say most bad brokers will do this, they will make sentences or claims which are conflicting within the same document. So they'll say, I don't know, like, it's a growing business, and then you look at the P&L, it's clearly not a growing business. Or they'll say, I don't know, they'll say something like, the seller's devoted his life to building this business, and then how many hours a week do you work? 2. Like the things that are conflicting. Ultimately, though, the short answer is it's difficult until you get to actual due diligence and you start seeing bank statements. And I would say you have to be very disciplined, because what the average person who's misrepresenting will make up an excuse why they can't send you something. It's like, oh, I closed my bank account, I don't have access to bank statements, or my credit card provider won't give me this, or actually, like, my friend paid for this service, so I don't have access. So you do have to be very disciplined. And for us, we will almost never, and it would have to get signed off by me if we're making some form of exception about something like that, for whatever it might be. But the average person misrepresenting, obviously, they know what they're doing. They will do it in such a way that you would not know unless you've done it, like we have 1,200 times. Like, we know when people are lying, because they'll be like, oh, this bank does not have an online login. And we know it does because we have other clients who have. Or you call the bank and you check. There are lots of different ways to get around things like that. But outside, you will not tell the two perspectives are different. The worst brokers will generally have conflicting information in there, but doesn't necessarily mean it's misrepresented. It's usually just that the broker's not very good. And that also does not necessarily mean the business is bad. A lot of good businesses hire bad brokers, and a lot of bad businesses hire good brokers. So
sure,
you can look at it lots of different ways.
Well, it feels a little like bowling with bumpers to have somebody who is a professional auditor kind of working with you on this process. Because I know, like, navigating that yourself and checking every assumption and drilling down and asking for every piece of information that might be hiding something. I have friends who have gone through this as business buyers, and it's a harrowing process of discovery and persistence, and just trying to stay organized and look under every stone and, find every risk. It's hard work. So I don't begrudge you the service that you provide at all. It seems very necessary. And actually, thinking through this, it's like, especially for a first-time buyer, I can really imagine a lot of value coming from having someone kind of hold your hand through experiencing a lot of these things, and showing off what you can do, and shopping in a marketplace of, with a certain quality floor to it. There's a lot to be said for that. Yeah,
I definitely think it helps as a first-time buyer. But like I said, conversely, if you have a lot of capital to deploy and you need to buy one business a month for the rest of the year, then that can also help simplify your job. So I guess there are advantages throughout the process. And fundamentally, like, my philosophy since day one of the business is I want the overall industry. And this was essential starting out when the industry was tiny. I needed the industry to grow. The only way the industry grows is if legitimate transactions happen where sellers get rich and buyers also get rich and do well, because the people who have their first exit selling an online business, what do they do with their money? No, they don't go buy real estate. They go buy another business, or they go do some angel investing, or they do some venture investing, or they become an LP in a fund. So a lot of the people we work with, they've come full circle. Maybe they're not launching another business from scratch, but you can be pretty sure they're not leaving the industry. Maybe they become mentors. Maybe they launch a coaching business. They're all staying in the ecosystem and kind of being helpful. People generally don't make their fortune and leave an industry entirely.
Yeah. After all that hard-earned wisdom. Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of hard-earned wisdom, I imagine that across these 1,200 transactions, there is a treasure trove of data inside FE International. And from my perspective as just a voyeur, I only see basically PDF versions of this. Is there like a massive database of structured data that gives you this God's eye view of like marketplaces and industry and valuations, and kind of helps you like screen out things? Like, are you looking at not different data, but differently contextualized data internally, or when you kind of, as an expert, get to go shop in this industry?
For sure. I'd say so firstly, when we put together valuations, so in our prospectus, you might see from a financial perspective, you probably see a snapshot of one tab of an Excel spreadsheet, essentially. In reality, going into that deal behind the scenes is probably 40 or 50 tabs of analysis to then simplify it and show it in a simple way. But there's tons of analysis that's gone in behind the scenes. We track literally everything, all the data on everything. So when we value a business, we're, I guess, fortunate because we've done so many deals. We have a comp for everything, or multiple comps. So we can value very accurately, particularly businesses we've sold before or similar before. We can be very confident in the accuracy of our valuation, and we pull in all of that data, so we can spot trends. We can make theories about what buyers are willing to pay for, what they're not willing to pay for. We can be very objective in our approach. We don't just look at the business and say, "Oh, that looks cool. I think someone will buy it." I read an article that said businesses are selling for this. Let's just choose that number. It's all modeled out. There is an element of, there's a lot of science. There's definitely an element of art. I would say it's 80% science, 20% art when it comes to valuation, because there is an element of, this looks like a good business. We haven't sold something exactly like this before, but we know buyers will like it. Or actually, you know what? This looks like a good business, but there's actually a fundamental problem. We shouldn't take it on, even though it seems objectively like we should. Which, I mean, ultimately is what we're, I guess, ultimately talking about, like alpha. That's how I make my money, is making a good judgment call on what we can sell and what we can't sell. If we just took on everything that looks good, then we almost definitely would not have a business. So tons of data to answer your question. What you see in the prospectus is a very summarized version of all the analysis we've done, but there's always a trade-off between giving too much analysis and not enough. So we keep the prospectus to a snapshot. But then if you ask our team, "Oh, hey, do you have a breakdown of like COGS by product?" we can send that to you. We will probably not send you what the actual product is or what the supplier name is, but we might say product 1, 10 cents, product 2, 15 cents, that kind of thing. So it's all there. You just don't see it as a buyer.
Super interesting. So it sounds like you're pretty opinionated about the valuations of these businesses. Is that a tough conversation with sellers who maybe come in with different notions of what their business should be going for?
There's lots of like tough conversations, but ultimately we're always honest with people. And I think fundamentally, because we only get paid if the business sells, we have no incentive to lie or misrepresent what we think a business is worth. Does that mean we're right 100% of the time? Absolutely not. But we can be as accurate as we can. And then when we need to be optimistic, we then make a judgment call. So if we say, "Hey, look, we think this business is worth 10 million, and the seller's like, "I really want 11, and we think it's a good business," we'll probably have a go. If we say it's worth 10 million and they're like, "No, I need 25, then we're not going to take it on. So we almost never take on businesses where we think the valuation is unrealistic. I'd say the conversations have got not necessarily easier, but as the industry's got bigger, the average person in the space has got more knowledgeable. I'd say there's definitely less surprise conversations where people are like, "Oh my God, I was absolutely not aware that's what the market was like at the moment. I thought everyone was paying 20 times revenue for every business." There's definitely still some of that. But I'd say on average, the average person today is better educated around valuations than they were 10 years ago. And we're always honest. Because I always say this, the team is always kind of maintaining discipline within the team. The team will often get frustrated when another broker or M&A firm will list the business that we were speaking to, but they'll list it at double our valuation. My point to the team is, did we get the valuation wrong? Probably not. Are they just being overly optimistic, and will the business not sell? and will they then call us in 6 months? Yes, that's exactly what will happen. So we've been doing this a very long time, so kind of we've seen it all before at this stage, and happy to be disciplined and like wait it out.
Yeah. I don't know if this is fair to ask you on the spot, or if you're comfortable sharing, but would you be able to kind of ballpark multiples for maybe like content businesses, SaaS businesses, and e-com, kind of your main 3 categories?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of at a high level, SaaS businesses at the moment, we're seeing anywhere. I'll probably get some slightly better data up. I mean, some better data.
Yeah, take your time.
Actually, I forgot we were recording, so I can just I'll get the actual data in front of me. I just pulled up the actual data in front of me.
Okay.
Yeah, so at the moment, in terms of multiples, and this is very broad, just an indication, because I'd say discussing how valuations work is probably another couple of hours on a podcast.
Fair.
Fundamentally, if we break it into our 3 headline business models, which is SaaS, content, e-commerce, yes, there are lots of sub-business models within that. Yes, we sell some businesses which are hybrid. Yes, we sometimes sell service businesses which do not exactly fit within the exact business model, but they're very close. SaaS businesses are generally the highest of the 3. Usually we see multiples anywhere from 4 to 10 times annual SDE. So annual SDE is, for simplicity's sake, is essentially net profit of the business, not taking into account what the seller's compensating themselves. Content businesses, anywhere from 2.5 to 4 times annual. And then e-commerce businesses, anywhere from 2.5 times to about 5 times annual. Again, that's very broad. That's our current data. In 12 months' time, that'll probably be different. 12 months ago, that was also different as well. But I'd say very broad. That's what businesses are selling for. Some will sell for more. There are a lot that will sell for less. But businesses we would not take on. But just because the average business we represent and sell falls within that multiple, that does not mean the average business is in that. Because arguably, we take on the upper threshold of like good businesses. So probably not the absolute best businesses, because the absolute best businesses either do not get sold, or they get bought privately for way above market. Do not sell the absolute worst businesses because they're not making any money. We sell like kind of, let's call it the top 20% of businesses, not including the top 0.1%.
Upper middle class,
Whereas the, I guess, average business, just by the very definition of average, is probably not in that.
Okay. Yeah, this when I first learned this combination of things, there's like kind of 2 concepts in that explanation that I remember understanding maybe for the first time when Brent Beshore explained them to me, and both of them sort of opened my worldview and seeing like, oh, you can take a business that's earning $100,000 a year or $1 million a year, and the quality of that revenue and the durability of the business, like this is where moats get quantified in the multiple that they earn at sale. So if you own a business your whole life and you never sell it, it doesn't matter what the multiple might be if you're earning $1 million a year. If you go to sell that business, all of a sudden it matters a lot whether you get a 3x multiple for your $1 million business, which means you sell the business for $3 million, or whether it's a 10x multiple and you sell a business for $10 million. So that was a huge kind of like, if you're starting from zero and you're looking at these multiples, you're like, well, I was going to flip a coin and either start a content business or a SaaS business. You're like, oh shit, well, I'm going to start a SaaS business because I can sell it for way more. It's higher quality revenue. It's a more durable moat. And the other was seller earnings or seller discretionary earnings, which is like, for your definition, like net profit plus what the seller is pulling out of the business, which in a lot of these businesses, and I tried to write a blog post about this, like proximity to profits. A lot of these small businesses, there's $100,000 in net profit, but there's also 200 more grand where the seller is paying themselves rent, they're covering their vehicle expense, they're covering their home office, and the net sort of benefit to the owner of the business is maybe $300,000 instead of that pure $100,000 that comes out as net profit. And so the process of like adding all of that back in to valuing the business is really is a gray area, but it's a really interesting sort of set of judgment calls. And I'm sure your accounting teams do a lot of this work to sort out what's a fair claim and what's not. And I don't know, understanding that all for the first time was really opened my eyes to a lot of things about the business world.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's definitely a lot to learn. And like the conversation around what's a valid add back and how do you calculate SDE is a ongoing debate, and there's no perfect answer. And one thing I would say, I know this is not a question, but I'm going to give an unsolicited answer.
Bring it on.
Just because multiples are higher for a SaaS business, because people ask me this all the time, does not mean you should launch a SaaS business. If you are, to my earlier example, the mum blogger who is a great cook, you should write about your recipes, and people will read about your recipes, and that will make you money. So you should definitely focus on like what you're good at. And also, while multiples for a SaaS business are higher than, say, a content or an e-commerce business, arguably it can take longer to get off the ground and start. This is one way I position it, and I'm not arguing in favor of any of the particular business models, because it really depends on what you're good at and what you like. I've seen far more businesses in the e-commerce space get to $1 million revenue in a year than I have seen SaaS businesses get to $1 million in a year, which is, I would say in SaaS, it's almost never, and in e-commerce, it's reasonably common. So yeah, there's not necessarily, do not pick a business model because the current multiples are higher. So while I believe like long-term, because SaaS has that recurring flow of income, yes, those businesses will probably always be valued more than content e-commerce. That like if you're starting a business today, you're not selling it for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. So like you shouldn't really be looking at current valuations. Maybe like the intrinsic parts of the business model that will not change.
Is there a way to get a price while we're talking about valuations on a business without like taking a ton of time committing to the sale process? Is there like a zestimate for businesses, or should you, is what we're talking about the multiples kind of like as close as you can get?
Yeah. So one, you definitely can't get a zestimate. Again, I'm not in real estate, so you cannot get a zestimate. There are definitely people that tell you can get a zestimate. There are definitely like automated valuations you can get, but automated valuations for a business, I'd say, do more harm than good, because either they're going to give you a really broad range, or they're going to give you an unrealistic range. Or I guess there's also a possibility sometimes they'll be correct. But what if the automated valuation tool tells you your business is worth a third of what it's actually worth? Or what if it tells you it's worth 10 times more than it's actually worth? That, like, in neither situation is that good information to have. I mean, one thing we do fundamentally as a core of our service is we offer free valuations to anyone who has a business we think will be a fit. So you don't have to hire us or pay us to do a valuation. I guess that's kind of our hook, essentially, because it's kind of like a getting to know you process. Like, we want to make sure the business is a fit and we can actually sell it. And equally, sellers want to kind of understand how we work, what we analyze, and go from there.
That was a perfect alley-oop that I didn't even know I was throwing. That's a great service, and it makes total sense, because I imagine there's people who, I mean, it's kind of also an answer to the question that I'm sure a lot of entrepreneurs have, which is like, how, if I want to be planning to sell my business eventually, like, how do I preserve that option? How do I optimize? How do I just avoid the dead ends that cut that option off for me in the future? So starting a relationship maybe now and understanding some of the inputs to that valuation is the right
exactly.
approach.
That's really my main tip, is like start like M&A firms like us. I mean, we've been in business for 12 years. That does not mean that every single year the people we do business with, we met in that year. The vast majority of people we're working with today are people we met 5 years ago. So it's never too early to start a conversation. And to my point earlier, like, we'll be super honest and direct if it's not a fit for us. If you come to us with a restaurant and you say, hey, can you value it? No, we can't. Can we recommend somebody who can value it? Probably not either, because we just don't know that space. And I don't pretend to know that space. If you have a SaaS business and you want to get a valuation, we can value it and it will be accurate.
Okay. Do you have a sense? You mentioned something earlier that very top, 0.01 or 0.1% of businesses sort of get done quietly for above market valuations, and then the bottom end of businesses are just not probably sellable at all, or are just in the process of going out of business. Do you have a sense of like what percent of deals get listed on a marketplace or with a firm publicly versus just get done quietly? Like, is that closer to 50-50? Is it closer to 90-10 or 10-90? Like, I wouldn't even know how to sort of guess at what that breakdown is.
Yeah, to be completely honest, it's very hard to know because one thing I've learned is what people tell you and what actually happened are not always that accurate.
Right.
So a lot of people say, "Oh, I had an exit," but an exit could have been like they assigned it to someone for $1. To your point about nexus of contracts, like.
Yep.
Yeah, so a lot of people will say, and I also, obviously, I have a very privileged seat. I know a lot of private details about people's lives. A lot of people that will tell you that you've had an amazing exit, I know their exit was actually relatively small. And people who you never hear from ever, or might say, "Oh yeah, I sold a small business," have $20 million in their checking account. Whereas the person you think is the famous guy on social media with 150,000 followers who has on their bio 3 exits. Those exits might have totaled like $40,000. So while I'm not belittling, like any exit is a good exit essentially, but I would say it's very hard to get the reality of private exits because, in my experience, almost everyone lies or will slightly change what really happened. And things like marketplaces, for example, where I guess you could argue that's like a privately done deal rather than a represented deal. The way they'll often work is if someone like removes their business from the marketplace, they're like, "Oh, it's sold." So if they had it listed for $10 million and then they remove it, or they actually sell it through a broker or something like that separately, it then gets removed and the marketplace is like, "Wow, we did a $10 million deal." But the reality is they didn't. And did it actually happen for 10 million or did it actually happen for 2 million? Who knows? I would say they might get, if I were to guess, I would say it's probably about 50-50.
Okay. Interesting.
Deals done privately, deals done through M&A firms. And then I would say, or business brokers, or I mean, there are lots of different categories depending on how big the business is. I would say as businesses get bigger, they're much more likely to have had professional representation. The smaller deals, more likely to have got done privately. The way I look at it internally is anything below marketplaces have a place in the industry for businesses, but I'd say they're really only good below about $100,000 in valuation, where businesses relatively lack complexity, don't need a huge amount of legal deal structuring, buyers are paying cash. As deals get bigger than that and more complex, you need professional representation. So do people try to do it themselves to save on the commission? Yes, but it's exactly the same as like people making $1 million a year who try to do their taxes with TurboTax. Can you do it? Yes. Did you save some money? Yes. Is it a good idea? No, because you probably actually lost money in deductions.
You should be thinking about return on headache, not saving every penny by that point.
Well, exactly.
Yeah. So as we kind of wind up here, I'm curious a little about the kind of post-sale transition process. Like what is the work required to actually hand over the keys between some of these businesses? I imagine that's not a small amount of work. But I also imagine it's a lot easier with a SaaS business than, a car wash. But maybe I'm wrong. And how involved is FE in that piece of the stage?
I'd say it depends. So firstly, we're as involved as the buyer and seller want us to be. At the very least, we are ensure that the legal element works properly. So you were buying X, that includes a list of 20 assets. Here's a list of 20 assets and like their usernames and passwords or whatever it might be. So we make sure that legally the transaction is consummated and there's not a situation where something's got forgotten or missed out. From a technical side of the transfer, really depends on the business and the buyer. Like if you're a first-time buyer and the seller is working full-time on the business, then the transfer is probably going to take quite a long time because the buyer's going to have to learn the business. The seller's super involved. There's probably a bunch of processes they haven't written down. Whereas the flip side could be super experienced buyer who has a portfolio of 10 companies in that exact industry, and the kind of seller's relatively hands off, and the handover could literally be like, here's the usernames and passwords. We'll have a call in like a month just to make sure we're doing everything properly. So a real mix, but I'd say we've kind of got the time and hassle down to a minimum at this stage with our process. It's very much still part of our service. We're not just like, our job is not just to get the contract signed. Our job is to make sure the business is transferred, because with like buying, this is what a lot of people don't realize, when you're buying a business, the most important time period is the first 3 months. If you take it over and you mess something up in the transfer, or you forget about something, or you don't get trained properly, you're probably not going to do very well with that business. So the initial handover and training is the most important part of the process. So from a long-term success, so we're very hands-on there. It really depends on the business in terms of how hard it is to take over. We'll do a reasonable amount of prep with sellers in advance. So we'll ask them how well documented their code is, their processes are, their like suppliers and things like that, and then we'll make them document it throughout the process. So when the sale actually happens, they're in a good spot.
Okay. I seriously could ask you questions all day. This is endlessly fascinating to me. I have one more that I'm definitely curious about, and then maybe we'll just have to do this again, because we're running out of time for my infinite curiosity and limited time.
Yeah.
Yours as well. Do you have, like, what kind of handle do you either personally or like as a company keep on basically your buyer alumni? Like, do you know who is been successful with the businesses that they've bought and how successful they've been, and like, is that part of the pitch to buyers? Oh yeah.
Can you repeat that question? You completely cut out for like 10 seconds.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. What is the, like, how much do you know about how successful your buyer alumni are? Like, you know, whether personally or professionally, like, is that part of the pitch on the buyer side? Is like, you know, 80% of our buyers have become successful. Can you not speak to that at all? Like, neither would surprise me, but I guess I'm curious how much
we definitely track it. I'd say we don't pitch it as a sales pitch, because ultimately we're representing the seller. We can't also represent the buyer. While we want to present ourselves as legitimate, what we're selling is not 80% of buyers are successful, because ultimately buyer success doesn't, and this is the dirty secret no one will tell you, it doesn't really come down to the business you're buying. It comes down to how competent the person buying the business is. Like a good operator can run most businesses successfully, even if the business is not that great, and a bad operator is going to run a fantastic business into the ground regardless of what happens. So we don't pitch the like percentages of success, because there's too many variables to go into it. I think anecdotally we have a lot of buyers who started out relatively small and they've built huge portfolios now, and they've now raised investor capital and they've done it outside. A lot of people just buy one business and they're quite happy making a nice living, working 5 hours a week, hanging out with their kind of family and kids or whatever it might be. Yeah. So there's what defines success? Is it growth? There are a lot of people out there who just want to make a living. They don't want to be making millions a year. They just want to have time. And there's kind of always a trade-off of time versus kind of return. So no, we do not track it in a huge amount of detail, but we do at the same time track repeat business. We want to make sure buyers come back. But there are lots of a buyer could do like a bit of a catch-22. If a buyer does really well, they're never going to come back, because they don't need to, because they've turned their $10 million acquisition into $1 billion. If they do really badly, they're obviously not going to come back either. It's the ones in the middle that are most likely to come back. The guys buying businesses, like I said, where they have 15% annual return on a good bit, you can do that every single year, raise more money every single year, and it will compound quite nicely. They're the ones who come back, and they're the ones, not the ones we care about, that's the wrong word, but they're the ones we focus on making sure they come back.
Beautiful. Okay. Well, that is a wonderful overview, I think, of both things. I really appreciate you taking the time and being so candid and sharing everything that you know. So where would you recommend anybody who's still got some curiosity to go follow up and dive deeper?
Yeah, so say like on our FE website, we have a lot of content we've published over the years, a lot of written content primarily. Other podcasts I've been on where we might have discussed different topics. You can find them kind of as you navigate through our site. We regularly publish like white papers with more data, which is the kind of thing you might be interested in. Some people just want to read about like success stories. So we have a real mix and a bit of everything. And then if you want to contact us, like it's kind of obvious how you do it on our website. On social media, I'm like pretty active on Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook. They're probably the three easiest ways to get hold of me. Or you can always email as well, and it will get picked up as well.
Okay. Thank you so much, Thomas, for taking the time. It was wonderful to meet you and learn a little bit about all the hard work behind the prospectuses that have taught me so much. I hope to do a transaction with you at some point in the future, but you give me a lot to think about.
Well, thanks very much for the discussion. It's been good.